Calvary students, so excited to be here. I'm already so thankful for how God is using this More Like Jesus series. I heard that small groups really got into it last week. God is doing his thing. So I'm excited for the rest of the series. And in case you weren't here last week, we started a new series tonight. It's called, or we started the last new series last week. English is my second language, everyone. Leave me alone. I didn't start speaking English until I was 17. So in case you weren't here last week, that's a lie. I want you guys to know every time I say that, I make the age slightly higher. I'm like, I didn't start speaking English until last week. Anyway, in case you weren't here last week, we started a new series called, someone told me what it's called? We started a new series last week, and it's called... That's what I thought. We talked about one aspect of how we can be more like Jesus, considering how Jesus would love us first. What does that mean we should do? Love first. That's right. But what does that love actually look like? What does it actually mean to go out and physically exemplify that? And so we also have to ask the question, why did Jesus love? So meet me in John chapter 4. Turn to your Bibles. If you don't have one, there's one under your seats. It's on your phone too, likely. It's in the Calvary Students app, wherever. Just get your hands on a Bible. Meet me in John chapter 4. I'll give you some context. So Jesus was having this conversation with a woman who was getting water from a well. And his disciples went to go get food. And when they came back, they found Jesus talking to her, which they thought was kind of weird because this is a Samaritan woman. Samaritan woman, and Jesus was talking to her, and it's not a thing that Jewish people did at the time. And not only did he talk to her, he told her a whole lot about her that she didn't know that he knew. So she was like, "You must be the Messiah," and he's like, "Dang right you are." So then she went off and told everyone about this conversation that she had with Jesus, where a man told her everything that about her, and then she runs off. She tells people about Jesus, and then the disciples have this conversation. So if you're in John chapter 4, meet me in verse 31. That's where we're starting today. John chapter 4, verse 31, it says this. Meanwhile, his disciples urged him, "Rabbi, eat something." But then he said to them, "I have food to eat that you know nothing about." And then his disciples said to each other, "Did someone bring him food? Could someone have brought him food?" "My food," said Jesus, "is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work." I had this student when I was youth pastoring in Arizona. His name was Ben Davies. And every time I talked to Ben Davies, it felt like I was talking to a cryptic riddle giver. For example, one time, so I just got to be so honest, and I know that none of them are watching this stream. And if they do, I love you guys. I miss you guys. I'm going to flame you a little bit. None of the boys in my last youth group had any drip, no swagger, no. They just... Respect to all the boys who don't know how to dress. He would just show up in old camp T-shirts from 2 years ago that were too small, cargo shorts, and Skechers shoes, and I'd be like, "We got to do something about this." And so everyone's, "Oh, what's wrong with Skechers?" Nothing. I'm just saying it's the whole combination. All right, let's get there. So one day these boys came to me. This group of boys came to me, and they were like, "We want you to take us back to school shopping." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I am honored." I'm honored. Thank you. Yeah, we'll do that. So it was this kid that I was telling you about, Ben Davies, and a couple other boys. And the day of, Ben Davies texted me. And he said he wasn't going to be able to go. But actually, he worded it more like this. "For reasons you shall not understand in the present time, but perhaps you shall one day, I am unable to join you on this expedition." Okay, dude. Okay, I might have exaggerated a little bit, but that's kind of how it felt like I was talking to him. It was never straightforward. I still don't know why he couldn't go with me. If I had to guess, his mom probably didn't want him dressing like me. That's fine. That's beside the point. You're probably looking at me like, "Me too." And so that's when I read this passage out of John chapter 4, that's how I feel the disciples must have felt with Jesus, because the disciples were like, "Hey, Jesus, you should eat something." And he's like, "I got food you don't even know about." And then they're like, "Is he hoarding a sandwich under his tunic? What is going on here? Did someone bring you food? Where did you get this food? What food are you talking about?" And then Jesus says, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me." Okay. But in that sentence, we get so much about what Jesus is about. So what was Jesus about? What was he about? What was he doing? He was seeking out his Father's will. So the question of the day and the question of the series is, how can we be more like Jesus? Well, if Jesus sought after the Father's will, what should we do? We should seek the Father's will. What was Jesus' motivation? The why of what he does. He's here. He came to do the will of the Father. There's this Gen Z saying that none of you say, because for a lot of you, home and school is the same place. I'm going to let you sit on that one for a second. And so there's like a lot of Gen Z sayings that I'm like, our kids don't say that. But there's this saying that you would maybe say about Jesus, that Jesus was standing on his Father's business. Do you understand what I'm saying? Standing on his Father's business. So many head shaking. Language, I don't know what he's saying anymore. Listen, Jesus always sought after the will of God the Father. He always sought after the will of God the Father. I think every characteristic and aspect of Jesus is driven by this. Why did Jesus love? To accomplish the will of the Father. Why did he heal? To accomplish the will of the Father. Why did he fight against the powers of injustice? To accomplish the will of the Father. You know where this is going. Why did he die? To accomplish the will of the Father. Why did he come back to life? Right, and so we know that Jesus, the Son, and God, the Father, are one, but we also see in the last moments, we see this in the last moments, I should say, of Jesus' earthly life. When Jesus was arrested and tortured, he famously didn't say anything. He didn't complain. He didn't hate his enemies. He didn't say anything to them. He didn't ask them to stop. Instead, he begged for God to forgive the people that were doing this to him. Does that mean that everything Jesus experienced wasn't painful? I don't think so. I'm sure it was excruciating. But power and ego never defined Jesus, and I don't think it did in that moment either. And in fact, I would go as far as to say that I think the most powerful and painful, or the most painful moment in Jesus' life was not physical, but instead was spiritual. When Jesus was being crucified, he took on the sin of mankind, and God severed the connection between God, or Father and Son, until the moment it was finished. Check this out in Matthew chapter 27. It says this: about 3 p.m, Jesus cried out in a loud voice in these words, which mean, my God, why have you forsaken me? He's like, God, why have you forgotten about me? Why have you done this to me? For Jesus to be separated from God was excruciating. It was the worst thing that could have been done to him. The difference between being connected and separated from God was immense, and it was painful. And we can see that that is true about Jesus. So then the question becomes, what about you? What about you? Think about this, and just stew on it for a second. If God was not in your life, would you even notice a difference? Would your life look and feel any different at all? You can't comprehend a difference if your connection is weak or non-existent. So, what do you do if you don't feel this constant connection with God? And right now you might be thinking, you know what, me and God, we're good. All right, good, you can still do better. But if you're in here right now, you're like, I don't pray, I don't read the Bible, I don't listen to worship music, I don't journal, I don't do any of these things. This is who we're talking about here. So how do you seek the Father's will? And then how do you live out the Father's will the way Jesus did? Well, here's an easy question. When you feel like connecting with a friend, what do you do? Text them, call them, hang out with them. You talk to them, right? You get around them. You spend time with them. How do you connect with God? You talk to him. You pray. Simple as that. Jesus' followers are actually at one point asking Jesus, like, hey, we see that you're off praying by yourself a lot. We kind of want to pray the way you do. Raise your hand if you've ever gone to pray and you're like, what do I do? What do I say? Anyone ever been there? Can we just be honest? That's right. Look, even the adults in the room have found themselves a little bit speechless in that moment. Jesus was off and on his own, praying and spending time with God, and he loved doing it. He was seeking God's will so that he could do what God the Father wanted him to do. So the disciples are like, Jesus, you're always off praying. How do we do it like you? And Jesus' response is in Matthew chapter 6, and I'm not getting there quite yet, but if you want to jump ahead in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 6, that's where we're going next. He gives them what we now know is the Lord's Prayer. Maybe you've heard it before. Each and every line in this prayer is an example of how we should come before God in prayer. If you looked at it from a surface level, or even if you just recited it, you would miss a ton of it. So let's break it down. Matthew chapter 6, verse 9 through 13. Are we there? And everybody said? No, yes, we're there. Matthew chapter 6, verse 9 through 13, it says this. This then is how you should pray. Let's pause there already. Lot to unpack just in that moment. This is then how you should pray. A lot of people have turned this into this is what you should pray. So they take this, and you've probably heard the rest of this passage. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Raise your hand if you're familiar with it. Raise your hand if you've ever heard someone just pray that. A lot of us, a lot of different sects of Christianity and Catholicism, they just pray these words, which I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with it, but Jesus tells us this is how you should pray. Consider the Lord's Prayer a template for your prayer life rather than just the go-to words to say. Let's move on. This is then how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread and forgive us our debts as we have also forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. A prayer we've heard 1,000 times. But let's break it down bit by bit, passage or section by section, and let's just figure out really what Jesus is trying to say and teach us here. The first line says what? Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Right off the bat, we can look into this and see there's two identities that give us access to God. God is our Father, so that makes us his brothers, his sisters, his pets. That makes us what? His children. His children. And as children of God, we get special access to him. We also bear the image of God. He wants a relationship with us where we can come to him. He is our Father. And the second identity here that I see is that Jesus says, hallowed be your name. We are name bearers. We bear that name. Exodus chapter 19 verse 6 says this, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. This is then echoed in the New Testament where it says this about believers, that we are a set-aside people, a holy nation. Listen, we carry God's name wherever we go. Everywhere we go, we carry God's name. This is identifying that wherever I am, my purpose is to represent God's name to the people around me. So that's just the first two lines. Let's keep breaking it down. Verse 10 says this, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Everything Jesus did, guys, everything he did, he was about the Father's business. He was about revealing God's kingdom on earth. His sole purpose was to do God's will. And so that should be ours too. I don't come before God when I pray to him to get stuff. I don't come before God to just give him my wish list and hope that he delivers on a couple of things. We should come before God because we want to do his will. We want to live out his plan for our lives. We want to fulfill our purpose in our lives. And the phrase on earth as it is in heaven, that is such a massive undertaking because you're basically praying for our lives to be the point where heaven and earth collide. And we want the way we live to break out revival everywhere we go. We want every interruption in our lives to be an opportunity for God to work. And if we want our lives to be that like nexus point between heaven and earth, then we got to be living in a way and acting in a way that is an extension of God's will in our lives. Does that mean bullying? Does that mean belittling? Does that mean being immoral with our words, immoral with our actions? Does that mean being lazy? Does that mean doing stuff with your boyfriend, girlfriend that you shouldn't be doing? No, right? None of this. On earth as it is in heaven doesn't mean around you. It also means in you and in your heart and in your life. Verse 11, give us this day our daily bread. Give us this day our daily bread. Daily bread is a callback to the Israelites in the wilderness. They would receive enough manna, bread, food for the day, and then they would have to come back the next day. Once again, really short line, a lot to unpack. It says, give us today our what bread? Daily. Good. Jesus taught us, and I had never thought about this until I started writing this sermon. Jesus taught us to ask God for enough to make it through one day and to come back the next day and ask for enough to make it through that day. Every single day. If God only gave you enough for today, daily bread, would you be satisfied or would you be angry? Daily bread. Because I think in modern society, we don't live in like a daily bread kind of mentality. We live in like a Costco mentality. I'm going to go